Yes, so welcome everyone to the second panel of the 10th Urban Arc Annual Conference here at the IHS. We have a fascinating set of five presentations in this panel titled Center and the Margins. Um, this panel problematizes the idea of terrains by asking the questions largely of how do you belong to a place you've always been in, and how do you entitle yourself to a place you newly find yourself in. Um, they traverse very distinct geographies from northwest Egyptian coast to the newfound capital of Nusantara to Delhi, Kochi, and finally Mumbai. In doing so, I have taken the liberty of reordering the panel away from the list that you have. The first two presentations will take us to Egypt and Indonesia. And I do that because they actually introduce us to the idea of how entire terrains are reshaped when the center or powers at the center start to imagine and approach them differently. It relates to political and historical erasure. Okay. The next two papers take us to actually Delhi and Kochi and talk about the biopolitics of how the center regulates, minimizes, and marginalizes homeless in Delhi and Dalits in Kochi. The final presentation takes us to Dharavi, and it takes us to how does the margin respond in the face of marginalization, and introduces us to this idea of permeability as almost like a microecological response to marginalization. Uh, just some housekeeping rules. It's 12 minutes per presentation. Please look at Shimoy here for panelists in person. And for those online, do have a look at your chat. That's where we'll be giving the time check. And for our audiences online, please put your questions into the Q&A box. So without delay, let's get into the papers. I'll invite the first presenter. That is, we have Yaya, who from Technical University Berlin, uh, and his paper is titled "On this Site in 1987, Nothing Happened: Entangled Customary and Legal Communal Land Regimes on Egypt's Mediterranean Coast." Yaya, over to you.
So I'll jump straight to it. I'm an applied researcher and activist on housing rights in Egypt. And this paper is part of a three-paper cumulative PhD I'm currently doing at the Technical University. And it questions and critiques the current property rights regime in Egypt. So it tries to look at the informalization of property. And I already wrote the first two papers, and this is the third one that looks at a different set of um, entanglement, like you're going to see. So it's based on a self entanglement. This is the house I spent most of my summers in as a teenager. Belongs to my parents, and it's built on land that used to belong to indigenous Bedouin. I'm in it. There's this sign that hangs that says, "On this site, in 1897, nothing happened." And I think my dad bought it as a kind of a joke or a funny sign. It's sold in the US. You can find it on Amazon for like, I don't know, $15 or something. And it seems to have a whole life of its own. And but for me, a friend of mine when I was still in college told me, like, how are you sure that nothing happened? Who was here? Who can say? And the reason the sign is there is that this used to be desert, or we're told this used to be an empty desert before the resort was built. And it shows the ignorance of the class and the owners of what happened there, what was going on there before the resort was built. So These are the people that used to own uh, the land. This is the Awlad Ali tribe. They're a group of tribes, but they're a big kin. They stretch from North Egypt, sort of the middle north, about just west of Alexandria, for those that know, all the way through to Benghazi in Libya, neighboring Libya. Of course, they existed before borders were there between countries. Um, they have their own customary law that was established probably around the 15th century. It's called Darbet Awlad Ali, which roughly translates to path. And um, this law was, in a way, respected by different rulers of Egypt all the way up until more or less the 1970s. So, in Ottoman times, under British occupation, after a lot of resistance, their customary law that said um, that regulated life, regulated land ownership, was pretty much intact. And I say this because I'm also trying to position that there is a law, they had a law. It wasn't a matter of being quote unquote uncivilized or informal. And but then later official laws sort of superseded their law and got them to lose most claims to their land. So their own law, and this is why I'm talking about the communality here, is that far from it being a romantic communality where all the tribes sort of share the land, over time it became a bit more individualized. It goes down to a sort of an immediate family that has a patrilineal uh, succession from a grand male heir, probably in the late 19th century. This is what the sort of after civil wars between them were settled, that they started having individual or familialized claims to land that are communal within this family. And this family is called Mar al-Dam, which is roughly blood kinship. And here I tried to look for a place that could tell us more or less about that. And you can see these two colors here, the blue and the red. So you can see like the sparsely spaced houses. So each one of them is a Amar, is a different Amar, and probably the agriculture near it is also divided between these Amars. Again, they were semi-nomadic and then they became semi-settled, so there is still some grazing and some movement, but the housing itself is settled, is fixed, and these rights of water and so on are regulated through the Darba. You can see 20 years later how these different Amars developed. They have more houses, probably the offspring built their own houses, or the father married more than one wife and built houses for his own extended families. Come the late 1960s, early 1970s, Egypt changes from a socialist regime to an open door neoliberal uh, regime. And the North Coast becomes ground zero for massive tourist and real estate redevelopment. It doesn't start straight away or it doesn't gain scale straight away, but the plans were put and a hotel, state-owned hotel, was built. It became very famous, and here we see it on the left with an ad, contemporary ad from the time. On the right, you can also see the kind of the othering begin. So this is in a widely read newspaper in Egypt, an article in 1974 that sort of demonizes the way the backward, uncivilized way of life that the Bedouin are living. It's in the bottom picture, it's not very clear, and compares it to these new tourist villas that are being built and saying this is the sort of the way forward. It says this is the encroachment of civilization or civility. In 1980, the government then extends its power over the Aulad Ali land by almost reallocating all of it, over a 100-kilometer stretch of coast, to a state owned real estate developer called the New Urban Communities Authority, or NUCA. And NUCA is very important here in the kind of instrumentalization of this uh, taking or land grabbing that happened. It didn't directly buy the land. It didn't evict the Bedouin straight away. It just reassigned the kind of the oversight of the land and claimed ownership, where we will see how, in sort of case by case, the ownership would then be kind of pulled away from the Bedouin, depending on the interest in the different sites. So this happened in a funny way, and I say funny because in still in the 1970s there was a very big uh, this uh, legacy of socialism was still around, and instead of getting private companies to buy the land and develop the coast, um, the NUCA orchestrated that housing cooperatives would start developing the coast. And this is an oxymoron because housing cooperatives are supposed to be about collective cooperative housing that is affordable and that is built for need, not built for uh, vacations and for tourism. But anyway, this is what we did. In by 1985, about 115 housing cooperatives had bought land all along this 100-kilometer stretch of coastline and proceeded to develop it. But here's the thing: these housing cooperatives, the law that establishes them, it existed before in the 1960s and then was updated in 1981, did something really exclusive. Housing cooperatives are very highly controlled in Egypt, very centrally controlled. They're far from a kind of spontaneous organic structure for building housing. And the only way you can set up a housing cooperative as members is either belong to a certain profession, and this profession has to be either by syndicate or by place of work, or belong to a very well defined geographic area like a village or a neighborhood. So theoretically, the Aulad Ali could have set up cooperatives and developed the coast, but then they had also had to buy the land to do that, and they did not want to do that because that would forfeit their claim to the land. On the other hand, people from the Nile Valley, which is away from the north coast, which is the sort of the central Egypt, where all the majority kind of population lives and the ruling class live, started setting up these housing cooperatives. So you see uh, employees of electricity companies, of public universities, of the army, of the judiciary, and so on, setting up these housing cooperatives and going there to buy land from the Auladadi and from Nuka to redevelop for tourism. Um, so this is one man from the Ministry of Foreign Affairs, a former ambassador who set up to do this uh, for a group of his friends from the ministry, or with a group of his friends from the ministry. And he started even before, like I think in the 1970s, looking for land. And then, in order to actually buy the land and build the resort, he had to set up this cooperative. So it wasn't the first thing; it didn't come first, but then it came later. And he, in an interview with him, he talks about how he had to buy the land twice. Once from the Awlad thief, because they have the actual possession or spatial claim to the land, and once from Nuka, who has the kind of legal but theoretical claim to the land. And each one of them exercises this claim in a different way. So with the Aulad Ali, he paid the price that was asked, but also they uh, did an agreement where they would always benefit from the development over time. So um, they would get building material contracts, they would get security contracts throughout. So they are still around, they're still part of the development, but they would not get to uh, to be there. At the other hand, Nuka had the legal claim to the land. It would give permits, and there's many bureaucratic procedures that had to be dealt with, and only really these cooperatives that are set up in even, let's say, more elite government institutions were able to jump through the hurdles of this bureaucracy and get uh, their resorts built. One of the things NUCA did is that it stipulated a state-owned contractor, so it's also doing the same kind of claim to build, to take the open tender that was made by the cooperative builder. So I think I just have a couple of slides more. Going to the house itself, um, my mother is the one that bought it officially, even though she was not part of the foreign ministry. She could do that because of kinship to my grandfather, who was with the foreign ministry. So even then, the members can extend the membership to their family, even though they do not belong to the main cohort that set up the cooperative. And it is through these bureaucracies like the cooperative housing law, the permit, the decree that comes out from the Minister of Housing giving the permit to build on the land, and the registered title for the cooperative, that she ended up owning this home. Another twist that happened, but I don't think I have too much time here, is that over time, in the next 10 years, I found that she actually ended up with an individual ownership of the home. So the cooperatives even have a sort of a backdoor or a loophole where the ownership does not remain a cooperative ownership between the members, but can also move. And over time, a lot of people have sold. And today, this place, this resort, is peopled by members of different parts of society, and not just this kind of original cohort that supposedly it was set up for. So this is the last slide. I just like to give you a visual. At the bottom, a friend of mine mapped not all of the resorts, but this is just to give you an idea of this 100-kilometer stretch of wall-to-wall resorts. So between the 1980s and the end of the 90s, almost all of this land was built, more or less in the same way. And now it's become very lucrative property. It's some of the most expensive real estate in Egypt. You can see this slide here from Airbnb showing the prices per night in different houses. And it's become such a phenomena of inequality in Egypt that now they call it the evil uh, coast, as compared to, let's say, the good coast, where the old times things were cheaper. It was easy for sort of a middle class to go and have an affordable vacation. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Yaya. That was a fascinating account of how customary law and the various political regimes that it goes through actually translates on ground in transference of ownership. Our next panelist we have is Haruming Sekar Saraswati joining us from the Corvinus University in Budapest. And I think her presentation takes us to Indonesia. So over to you.
Yes, thank you. Good afternoon, everyone. I would like to present our research on behalf of Irfan Prasetya and me, Haruming Saraswati, from Corvinus University of Budapest. We would like to present you our research on decolonizing the land boundaries and the land use planning and its implication in urban transformation and indigenous reconciliation in the new capital city of Indonesia. So this is our agenda for today: introduction and analysis, and then we go to conclusion. So the research context here is the capital city relocation of Indonesia. So Indonesia has decided to relocate, to move its capital city from Jakarta to Nusantara. Why it has to be relocated? Because Jakarta is overpopulated with 20 million people, and Jakarta is also prone to natural disaster with annual flood and also sometimes the earthquake also, and there's urgency to move the capital city to a more stable capital city in a more stable location, which less populated place. That's why the government decided to relocate the capital city to Nusantara in East Kalimantan. The capital city is inaugurated in 2024, but the physical development still ongoing up to now. And the concept of the new capital city is quite more sustainable from the previous capital city Jakarta, with a good concept of smart city in its government, its transportation and mobility, in its living, and also natural resources and energy, and more sustainable industries and human resource, and also built-in environment and infrastructure. So this is what they promise on the new capital city. And this is the principle of the new capital city to be green, resilient, sustainable, inclusive, and smart. And we can see here that the new capital city is quite green because we built the new capital city from scratch from the rainforest. So it's quite controversial from the side of the environment consideration. But in this research, we would like to focus on the indigenous people, and there is many challenges in this the development of the new capital city, and we would like to focus on one issue is the potential of the new capital city Nusantara project to marginalize the indigenous community and violate the right to land, livelihood, and cultural identity without proper consultation or legal certainty. So we propose one of the solution. There are many alternative solutions, but we propose one solution is to the decolonization of the land boundary and the land use planning and policy in the governance side. So the research question of this research is how the land boundary and land use policy decolonization can solve the conflict within indigenous community. And the second research question is what is the implication of this decolonized policy. So this is qualitative research with single case study. Actually, there are many other samples of capital city relocation. There are at least eight countries in the world in the history that relocate their capital city, but we choose the single case study because this quite not the same as the other capital city relocation. The primary data is in-depth interview with a representative of the indigenous people and also with the expert. And the secondary data is from the academic journal and relevant document. The finding is that there are at least 20,000 indigenous people in East Kalimantan are impacted, and consists of 21 customary ethnic group in some area in East Kalimantan. They're generally lacking of official recognition. Many of the indigenous people don't even have legal ID card, let alone the finite document for their customary land. Therefore, it raised the agrarian and customary land conflicts, where sometimes the customary land that considered by the indigenous people are sacred should be used by the government for the interest of developing the new capital city. And due to the isolated area of the indigenous people, they have lack of information and participation access to the development of the capital city. When they raise protests or question to the government, they often receive threats and intimidations. And also there are land and settlement eviction that happen in several area in Pamaluan. So the necessary approach is the human right based approach, and also the colonization of the land use policy, including the land boundaries in Nusantara, in order to guarantee the protection of individual rights, sustainability, social justice, and wider public acceptance. So this, oh, wait. So this is the responsibility is the moral and legal responsibility, as well as to decolonize, to change the system of the agrarian and land policy, to have the regulation that is more inclusive to all the people. And how the decolonization of land boundary and land use policy should be done in Indonesia. The first is to dismantling the colonial or the conventional system. So the agrarian law and regulation in Indonesia is quite influenced by the Dutch uh, colonial system that Indonesia should be used to be colonized by Dutch, and the law is influenced by the Dutch system also, and which is not quite inclusive. So we urge the urgency to change the system of the agrarian law to be more inclusive to the indigenous people and all people that is involved. Second is to centralize the indigenous and local knowledge by include and prioritize the knowledge and worldview of the indigenous people and local communities in the decision-making process. So we should also include them in discussing the policy and the regulation, not only for the common people, but also for the indigenous people. Third is to promote the self-determination and sovereignty. We should consider that their future is also theirs, not only in the hand of the government, the central government itself. The fourth is to prioritize ecological and social well-being. So in the development of the capital city, is the environment issue is very much a big issue because they built the capital city from scratch from rainforest, So this is also an issue that is raised by the indigenous people also. And fifth is to reclaim and restore by reclaiming indigenous name, landscape, and cultural practices. So it's more than the land, it's actually their identity that is quite disturbed by the development of the new city in their area. And also the last is by addressing the historical injustice by explicitly confronting and correcting the historical inequality in the land use regulation, which is often prioritize resource extraction and rigid private ownership. And when we decolonize the land boundary and land use policy, there are many implications in the context of Indonesia. The first is that we need to move beyond traditional profit-driven urban planning model to create a more inclusive system that serve all members of society. This is quite fundamental, but it's also comprehensive change that needs to be done. And the second is the use of alternative cartography or the mapping. This is quite a big work, actually, not only technically by making a new map, but also is quite political how the land boundaries um, will be decided, because most of the time the customary law by the indigenous people doesn't have a legally measured. They don't have finite boundary from where to where, and this is quite also technical work also to legally measure the customary law and how to negotiate with the leader of the indigenous people how it should be done, and how also not only the boundaries but also how the customary land can be used. Can the customary land also be used for other purpose or not? And for the point of view of the indigenous people is how sacred is the customary law, to what level, to what extent it is sacred, etc. That's quite a lot of work, but it needs to be done. And the third is to support community-led initiative by empowering and supporting community-led initiative to focus on the ecological repair and other changes. Fourth is to integrate the indigenous philosophy by incorporating indigenous value system into the urban design and planning processes. And fifth is furthermore is to rethink education by revamping the planning curricula to integrate the indigenous knowledge. So everybody should know how to deal with the indigenous needs and how to deal with them. That will include also how to think about the dispute settlement and conflict resolution with the indigenous people. And the last is to create a co-management agreement by establishing binding co-management agreement on biodiversity protection zones and resource management areas between the government, the corporates, and indigenous community. So it involves many parties here, not only the government and the indigenous people, but also with the business people that want to build any infrastructure there, and also the affected people outside the indigenous people, and many parties that should be cooperate in a good relation. So in the conclusion is that Nusantara needs to decolonize its land boundaries and land use policy. And decolonizing the land boundary and use policy involves dismantling colonial system or a conventional system, and to centralize indigenous local knowledge and decolonization.
Haruming, I think we've lost you, but we were on a concluding slide. So I'm going to swiftly move to the next presenter, and maybe we can bring her back once we have the Q&A. We'll move to Athira from Sree Sankaracharya University of Sanskrit, and her work is located in Kochi.
Good afternoon, all. I'm Adira. I'm a PhD candidate from Department of Geography, Sree Sankaracharya University, Sanskrit Kaladi. This paper is a part of my doctoral research. The title, The Produced Marginalities, Spatial Marginalization of Dalit Settlements in Kochi Metropolitan Region in Kerala. This paper is an empirical and conceptual attempt to reimagine spatial marginalization of Dalit communities in urban spatialities through a critical ethnography in Kochi metropolitan region of Kerala. Much like the urban configurations elsewhere in India, the persistence of caste intermixed with class and gender relations is explicit in contemporary urban spatialities of Kerala. And this paper critically examines the nuances of class gender relations in producing spatial marginalization spatial marginalization of Dalit communities living in Dalit settlements of Kochi urban region. And the study aims to reconceptualize the urban space, emphasize on Lefebvrean urban scholarship along with Dorin Massey's radical thinking on space to build more gender-aware approach in geographical knowledge production. The slide shown, the picture shown that the satellite image view of the study area, and I have been selected the two Dalit settlements in urban spatiality. And in this paper, I just to try and figure out or explore the Dalit agency of the urban space making, and the Dorin Massey and also the Henry Lefebvre trying to establish that the space is socially produced and always historical throughout the historical process, and the spatial politics always inherent in that inherent in the production of space. And along with we heard about that the land and the resource distribution and that relation in the relationship with the Dalit, it is problematic in the sense the Dalit community is always deprived in the resource distribution. And I am trying to figure out the marginalization tendencies in Dalit community in urban spatiality, and all and all together, and I'm trying to explore the spatial politics of resistance of Dalit community in the process of urban space. And methodologically, I follow the critical ethnography along with some kind of archival research also done. And the slide shown two settlements in urban speciality is a Kochukadandra Harijan colony and the Friendship Nagar. The Kochukadandra Harijan colony is a settlement that is a displaced settlement as a part of the establishment of a naval base in and port development, in the process for port development. And another settlement is Friendship Nagar. The settlements was a traditional Pulaya agriculture settlements. The Pulaya community is one of the Dalit community in Kochi and also Kerala. Is a um, ag- uh, agricultural labors. In historically they are bonded labors that they are attached to they have the historical history of the slavery. And my inquiry on how the Dalit space, urban space was produced in Kerala, and I can see the urbanization of largest the Kochi urban space was uh, reclaimed from the backwaters. Uh, the wetland agriculture field in historically wetland agriculture fields, and the Pulya communities is a descendants of the original and inhabitants of Kerala. And there are a severe form of untouchability and unapproachability kind of casteist practices or was in the urban speciality before the urban process. And the Dalit community have a restriction to enter the towns in Kochi such as Ernakulam and Tripunithura. And there are a very clear caste-based residential segregation inside the town also, uh, also in Kochi urban space. In terms of the resistance, and I'm already mentioned that there is a very they have Pulya community have the strong restrictions to enter enter the town. So the as part of their resistance and mobilization, there is a conference. They were conducted in backwater. It's known as Kayal Sammelanam in Malayalam. The backwater means Kayal, and the meeting was organized by Pulayas of Cochin in the backwaters in 1930. This was a symbolic protest against the caste-based stratification, and the formation of Kochi Pulaya Mahasabha is a community organization of Pulaya community. And after that, the under the princely state of Kochi, there are also welfare activities and establishment of residential planning for them, establishment of colonies and other educational upliftment. And later that the urbanization process is rapidly moved, and the Cochin port also already established. And in this time, the historians are stating that the transition from the attached labors to the waged labors. And we all about the developmental emergence of the Kerala socio-cultural space due to the Renaissance movement and missionary activism, along with the political mobilization. Um, that was the basis of the development of development paradigm of Kerala. And my major, my what I'm trying to establish that the development paradigm is always Kerala, but the the Dalit land question is raised in this context, and the Dalit community in Kerala is far behind in terms of land ownership. And as it's a remaining part of my presentation, I'm trying to reflect some my field work, critical ethnography field work in have done in the field. And these images are shown in the backyard of houses in Friendship Nagar and other settlement, Kochi Hibjan colony. This is and trying to establish that we can see the polluted sewage in the Dalit settlement. Um, and the nearness of the Dalit settlements in the sewage, and I'm trying to argue that the Cochin urban space is developmental activities undergoing the Greater Cochin Development Authority and the rapid urbanization process with the port development and shipyard and along other kind of urban, so-called urban expansion. But the bad, the most problematic things in a lot. One second. Okay, I already mentioned that the Dalit settlements in nearness of the shallow sewage. There is a caste history of the Dalit settlements on the margin of the streams and canal. It was during the period of expansion of the um, wetland paddy cultivation in Kerala that the Pulaya, who were the agricultural slaves in accordance with the caste-based social hierarchy, settled on the banks of paddy field for the agricultural work and to guard the field of their landlords. The speciality of Dalit settlements hinders the Dalits from the achieving the social and economic advancement available of the other class of urban settlements, and their everyday routine of Dalit colonies is involved various menial labors for the city, such as construction work, cleaning jobs, and domestic works in in apartments on houses in the urban region. And they have after the work they have to return their homes located the next to the urban garbage disposal drain. And what I'm trying to say that the power dynamics between the state, caste, and land ownership significantly influence the marginalization of Dalits in these scheduled caste colonies. And Dalits have been forced to live in the Porambok settlements in colonies due to the exclusion of land ownership. The Porambok land is a land category that unassigned land of the state. It's near to the sewage and in between the paddy field. And there are even after the implementation of land reforms by the state government of Kerala aimed to abolish the landlordism in 1970s, Dalit often received only bare minimum land to set up a hut. There was has no intervention of the state to address their landness effectively, making Dalit landowners.
You can finish. You can give a concluding remark.
Okay, and there is also I want to include that the woman life in Dalit colonies is a disproportionate burden of Dalit women. They function as they labors is a domestic labors in urban specialty. Their daily routine to complete the household chores and morning and traveling to the work as housemates, returning to home. Their everyday cycle like that. And the Dalit colonies as a marginalized space, but also the gendered spatial formation. The woman living very confined with the intersecting hierarchies and caste, class, and patriarchy. To conclude that, the Dalit colonies are the socially produced marginalized space that can be understood as a new forms of structural and spatial inequality in urban spatiality. And Dalits who belong to the lower caste in historically existing caste hierarchical caste system have been excluded from the resource distribution and power relations, and they remain the margins of little headway in the land ownership or minimum standard of living condition in urban spatiality. And society marginalized Dalit by producing marginalized spaces in the form of caste colonies, and the reproduction of Dalit marginalities is continuing in society. Thank you.
Okay, let's move to the next and the last presentation. Aisha is here from Technical University, Munich, and her work is located in Mumbai.
Yes, thank you so much. The last presentation before lunch break, so please bear with me. I'd like to start by sharing this image and asking you what are the words or adjectives that come to your mind when you think of informality? This is a picture now of Bandra East in Mumbai. I'm just going to give you a moment. And another image of the same settlement. What are the words or adjectives that you think of when you see this image? Now, what if I were to say that informal settlements are beacons of sustainable urban development? I'm going to present in 5 parts and start with the background. India is now the most populated country in the world, and Mumbai is its economic capital. It's a special city because land speculation has reached such a level that real estate values even surpassed cities like New York and London in the past. It's a narrow peninsula with over 12 million people. And what's really astounding is that over 50% of its population lives on about 12% of the land. These are its informal settlements shown in the image. So these makes these some of the densest areas in the world. And the inequalities and health risks of living in such areas have been documented by researchers and became very obvious during the COVID-19 pandemic. To tackle this informality and provide these people with formal housing, there are slum redevelopment projects being implemented by the government. According to Yorick Fonseca from the SRS, there are 4 types of redevelopment that can be done. The charity model, in which an external entity pays for redevelopment. The government rehabilitation model, in which the government provides the funds. The cross-subsidy model, in which investors do redevelopment. And the self-redevelop model, in which the people themselves can undertake redevelopment. And as of now, the cross-subsidy model is being promoted by the government. So let's take a look at it. It's based on neoliberal policies implemented by investors. Apartments are provided free of cost to inhabitants, and it's cross-subsidized by extra apartments built and sold in the open market. All households are relocated to apartments of the same size of about 25 square meters, which is around 5 square meters per person for the average family of 5. And inhabitants can also be relocated to other parts of the city. Now, this is an image of a redevelopment project, a small one, which took place in Dharavi. And as you see, the light and ventilation conditions in this building could be argued are worse than what would have existed in the first place. So there are a lot of detrimental effects that have already been discussed by researchers, increasing the already severe density in these settlements, making apartments unaffordable because people now have to live in high-rise apartments in buildings with increased maintenance costs, and they lose their sources of income. Some sections of the population are considered illegible. Investors are keen on redevelopment in the heart of the city and not really focused on the outskirts. Investors can use violence against inhabitants, which have been often documented. And even action can be taken against inhabitants who do not join the project willingly. This seems to not be working properly. This side? Okay. And according to Amita Bede, these projects, they delegitimize the struggles of inhabitants by portraying inhabitants as freeloaders because they are given to them at free of cost. And this she considers the most violent outcome. So, okay, we go on to the research question. Maybe I can just say next. Okay, next, please. Next slide. So can informal settlements in Mumbai be redeveloped sustainably? Next, please. And the focus is on understanding the spatial configurations in my research. So we go on to the methods. It's a qualitative research project in which I began by looking at informal settlements of 3 different scales. So beginning with Malwani on the top, which is a low-density settlement of about 1-story structures, then went to Dharavi, which has about 4 to 5-story constructions, and then to Bandra East, which has 6 to 7-story constructions, and shown in the beginning of the presentation. And what I discovered was that hybridity is an important spatial component to Mumbai's informal settlements. So what is hybridity? Hybridity is a concept, next please, of architectural theory. And in its essence, it means the mixing of uses, but it goes beyond mere mixed use building. It means uses that are mixed, which depend on each other, which are interrelated, interconnected. They begin to share intensities. Each hybrid is a unique creation, and they promote urban porosity, and that is pedestrian-oriented urban spaces. And there's increasing interest in this concept because of its possibilities of increasing sustainability, adaptability, and the preservation of cultural heritage. Now, in Mumbai, the vernacularly formed informal settlements already consist of hybrids, which spatially cater to the socioeconomic requirements of the people. So, I decided to analyze Dharavi. Now, it's one of the densest settlements in the world, and it's already known as a metonym for the word slum, as the research of Roy shows. It has a vast variety of products created, and it also has educational, medical, and religious institutions. And now the Dharavi redevelopment project threatens to demolish what exists, and the severity of it is that there's limited data on existing practices. So Dharavi was selected as a case study because of the complexity of hybridity in it, as well as the imminent change that is to be done through the redevelopment project. The research situates itself at the intersection of ethnographic research and urban spatial planning to provide inferences for more sustainable approach. Okay, it's stuck again, yeah. So we started by asking, can informal settlements in Mumbai be redeveloped sustainably? Hybridity was then discovered as an essential spatial component, and Dharavi was selected as a case study. So I looked at 3 different scales, from a hybrid unit to a hybrid complex to the hybrid settlement. And with each of the scales, I looked at a factor that was discovered, a perspective of collaboration, identity, and sustainability. And through these 3 scales arose the cumulative doctorate. So the results, the hybrid unit. This is a potter's household with 5 members. And as you can see in the image, the domestic and economic activities are merged. What I also discovered was that there's a central role of women through this proximity of uses, because the daughter-in-law in this household doesn't just help the mother-in-law with domestic work, but she assists her husband and brother-in-law in economic processes, and she takes care of her child when it comes home from school. There's also collaboration in the microecologies in the neighborhood, because the kiln, for example, is also used by other households in the immediate surroundings. So this leads to staggered processes in the neighborhood, or the microecology, as we called it in the paper. And it leads to cost-effective systems in which a few people are hired or work for this whole neighborhood. So, for example, there's a worker who mixes clay who works for different families on each day of the week. There's also a staggered process of delivering clay to the potters community and transporting products, as a few households will finish work on a specific day. And so it's important now to find inferences for for facilitating collaboration and redevelopment projects. So a vertical connection of users was one idea. The importance is to retain proximity, but still improve living conditions. The use of roofs, the use of specific production zones, shared infrastructure like the kilns, which already exist, to promote them and formalize them, as well as public amenities. Now, the second scale was a complex of 3 buildings for a leather manufacturer. Now, in this case, I looked at identity because, as is seen in places like Dharavi, the socioeconomic practices of a place are dependent on the family, on religion, on caste, which also then dictate the space and the spatial constellations. So, employers prefer to have people of the same caste or community. And here different levels of identity were discovered, from the woman in a household to the family in the community itself in the settlement, and the settlement as a whole in the city. And some inferences, 2 minutes left, so I'm going to power through. So some of the inferences were having courtyards, using neighborhood spaces like roofs as sheltered spaces for specific community activities, especially those which could have conflict in the neighborhoods. For example, since you have Muslim communities living next to Hindu communities, which might be vegetarian, for practices like Bakri Eid or for processions of Ganesh Chaturthi, that you have more sheltered community spaces to promote harmony and living together in these kinds of settlements. What was also very important is increasing public access to informal settlements, which would again help counter the pejorative nature which is viewed in public discourse. When people from the outside can actually enter here to buy goods, it would also increase the sales in these settlements by up to 5 times, as researchers have shown. So this can also help counter unfair perceptions of informality. The next scale was the settlement scale, in which the perspective of sustainability was used, and there are a lot of sustainable processes seen in Dharavi, from forms of micromobility, use-based typologies, community-led redevelopment, organic forms, and socioeconomic stability and adaptability. And for this, a SWOT analysis was used to examine each of the strengths, the weaknesses, and the opportunities to it. And the result is Dharavi is hybrid. It is a beacon of sustainable urban development that should be promoted and not viewed pejoratively. So what are the conclusions? The results are not just important to Dharavi. Hybridity is intrinsic to all vernacular informal settlements because they always cater to the needs of the surroundings, whether in domestic or commercial sectors. Every settlement is unique. And sustainably redeveloping these areas requires space and use-based requirements. And this is not just true for Mumbai. There are also accounts which show that in Nairobi, you have chill spots, which are socioeconomic practices of the citizens. In Brazil, you have private spaces which open into public areas and also cater to socioeconomic requirements. So this is a global phenomenon. There are parallels that can be drawn to global areas. So can informal settlements in Mumbai be redeveloped sustainably? Yes, if they facilitate collaboration, enrich identity, and advance sustainability. And for this, the data reveals that there has to be a shift from the cross-subsidy model of redevelopment to the self-redevelopment model, for which additional research is needed in policy, in finance, and in methods of collaborative process. I can't go more into detail, but thank you so much for your time.
Thank you, all the presenters. I think it was a fascinating set of papers. Sometimes when the papers are so varied in their context, And diverging in their specificities, it allows us to ask the broader questions. So I'm going to reserve my questions actually to give time to the audience, but I'm going to leave with a comment, which is, if at the heart of each of these papers lie the idea of political erasure, for the first two it was of the past, for the next two it was of the present, in terms of the face of the inadequacies in the way that they're not allowed to create the references. And Dharavi both as probably an example of what happens when references are allowed to come into fruition and for people to consolidate, but also in the face of Dharavi redevelopment, the future hangs in precarity. So political erasure can be of the past, of the present, and the future. How we may think of it as, from the previous panel, what is it that is the kernel of migration? What is it that translates across all of these presentations that disallows the formation of references and thereby belonging? So that's the comment I'm going to leave with, but I do want to go to the audience and get a couple of questions. We can probably take 3 or 4 questions at a time to.
Hi, thank you all for your presentations. My question is relating to this straddling of formality and informality that I saw in a lot of your work. There is something to be lost in the formalization, especially Aisha, where you were debating how we can go from the informality of Dharavi, how can we formally design or redesign it to include some of the elements that exist. Are there not a lot of intangibles that evade documentation and sort of making it static through our research that cannot happen in a formal design process? So is there space to allow informality and not try to manage it in our cities? And can this be done legally? I think that's where my wonderings are.
Yeah. Hello. Yeah. Thank you to all the panelists for their wonderful presentations. So my question is to Haruming. You have spoken about decolonizing land policy for indigenous communities. So I wanted to ask if you have any experience of how of engaging with the administration, because there's a lot of resistance from the administration in accepting indigenous wisdom, traditional knowledges. Like in India also, the indigenous communities that are Adivasi communities here, there's a lot of conflict with the forest department in claiming their access to land. So while you have defined decolonizing land policies, but taking them or having a discussion about them with the administration, has there been experience around that and the resistance between both these actors? So wanted to know your thoughts about it. Thank you.
Maybe I can start with the first question. So is there space for informality in cities? And I believe that's like one of the most important questions, because there's a researcher named Jorkman who says that actually it should be perceived as a norm in the post-colonial world. And I would definitely say rather leave the informal settlements as they are, as compared to the investor-driven, profit-oriented redevelopment that is happening now. From my point of view, that would be better than to leave things as they are. There are a lot of intangibles involved, which is why it has to be community driven. And these settlements are often community oriented. Like even in Dharavi, in response to the pandemic, it was the communities that were best able to cater to the needs of the people. And that's why it has to be community led, but then also assisted by planners to ensure that there are enough schools for the whole population, there's enough open space for the whole population, because these are the things that are right now critical and need to be expanded. And only then can these intangibles be implemented. So yes.
We can go to Harumi for the question asked here by the audience. Did you get the question?
Yes. Thank you for the question about the experience on the dispute. In my research, I have an in-depth interview with the representative of the indigenous people. So for the dispute settlement, it's quite complicated. because in one side the indigenous people, some of them don't have a legal ID, let alone the legal documentation of the land that they have, and most of the conflict will rise on the customary land that for the point of view of the indigenous people is considered as sacred, and as well as other land that they have. Is quite complicated in the conflict resolution, and the result of the several conflict is quite various. It depends on to what extent the land can be used for other purpose other than their own use of the land, and also it depends also on the level of sacredness of the land itself, and some other factors, and also it's quite political. It depends on how the negotiation and the conflict resolution itself, and the variety of the result of the dispute settlement is the result of the policy itself, that it has a general regulation on how to deal with the indigenous people land, but it doesn't have the detail and the standard operation procedure on the dispute settlement and the conflict resolution. That's why the result of the negotiations is quite various, and this is where we as the research urge the importance of have decolonize the regulation on the land, on the indigenous people land, and how it measured and how it will be used. That's the urgency of the decolonization of the regulation in agraria and the land use. Thank you. I hope it answers.
Yeah. So if you don't have any more questions, I have a question, which is to presenter 1 and 3, which is you passingly mentioned how, okay, where are my notes? Yeah. How infida or neoliberalism is actually reshaped not just the relationship of the margin or whosoever was defined as the margin in that paper, but also existing institutional mechanisms, and very different, very distinct in the two of these. The first one talks about uh, actually the infida using customary laws and the previous arrangements of the socialist legal arrangement to convert those lands, and aids, create pathways to actually have these multiple conversions. Whereas in the paper 3, what we see is, Binsi, your paper is actually a sense of decapacity in terms of they don't know. You mentioned that with that change, the state agencies were at a loss of direction. And how do these two kind of speak to each other? Like, is it, and then how do we then look at neoliberalism across both your papers? Because then it's not one process, it is many. It manifests in very distinct, in fact, opposite ways in both your papers. So how would you deploy it, and how would you actually theorize it? Because in the same panel, in another paper, it is actually creating pathways, for this kind of transfer to happen, which is much more complicated, goes back 1,000 years of legal titles. You don't have to. Do we have any more questions from the audience? If not, then maybe Yaya, and then you could answer, and then we can wrap.
Okay, that's a very interesting question, and it, Egypt has its very own dealing with this kind of neoliberal and socialist sort of history. So, uh, coming here to Germany a few years ago and seeing what happened when sort of Western Germany took over Eastern Germany, and how the socialist state there was dismantled in sort of overnight. So, and this made me think about, wow, so actually what happened in Egypt is something completely different. So when Sadat started to dismantle the sort of the socialist state, he did something from the government's perspective or state perspective, which was the best of both worlds. He kept certain state owned enterprises and institutions and liberalized others. So what actually happened is that the liberalization happened more for social welfare, but kept the sort of the money making side of business for the state, which is extremely the opposite of other states, which could seem liberal and have a liberal economy, but have welfare also, or where the state's role is welfare. So it's not just regulation, but also to give welfare. So it's a complete kind of, and I think it comes, of course, from authoritarianism, where there is no little sort of people's oversight on what's happening. And this is the best of both worlds for the state, where it can make money and can continue to have sort of lucrative business, control the regulation and the output. So of course, with land, the state sees itself, especially in Egypt, where this kind of motto is that we live on only 5% of the land, and the 95% is empty desert, which where Bedouin live, where other happen. But it says like all this land is state owned, and the state actually under socialism divided this land, the public land, into two domains. So it had state public land, which is land that is sort of to be used communally and publicly. And actually, this is the minority of this kind of state-owned land. It's the rivers, waterways, streets, public spaces. But then all desert land is termed as state private land, because under socialism, it saw itself as being entrepreneurial, and that it should be able to have, or state capitalism, it should be able to use this land for business. And if it was all under one public domain of land, it could not be used for business. But then this carried over under neoliberalism. So it's a fascinating for me dichotomy in how it sort of made its own world and from its view, and just sort of pushes that perspective.
Thank you. Yeah, I think I look forward to that section in your paper. Thank you so much.